Walter blinked away the dust swirling around him in the carnival's open-air tent, trying to look imposing while standing on a creaky wooden platform. He was flanked by crates of promotional material, half-splintered boards meant for dramatic snapping, iron rods twisted into curly metallic pigtails, and old-fashioned medicine bottles labeled with questionable cures. He adjusted the bright red cape across his broad shoulders for the sixth time that morning, feeling a bead of sweat run down his cheek. He flexed experimentally but with restrained caution. Despite the bulge of his formidable biceps and his towering frame, Walter would move heaven and earth to avoid harming a single soul. Even a squeak from the floorboards made him recoil, almost apologetic for stepping too hard. Behind his towering form stood the carnival's manager, Randolph "Randy" Peake. Ever the showman, Randy wore a pinstripe suit, polished boots, and a wide grin that was equal parts charm and threadbare sincerity. Today, he was primping Walter for the big crowd. Randy tapped his cane against the stage and cleared his throat. "Walter, my dear boy, remember, you're supposed to be the muscle. When these folks see you, they've got to believe you can crack these boards like toothpicks." Walter mustered what he hoped was a suitably fearsome expression. Inside, he was quaking with nerves. Over the years, quite a few strongmen had toured with Randy's carnival, each one a legend in their own right. The Iron Hercules, Big Burly Bob, and Grizzly Greg, to name a few. They had all boasted about bench-pressing elephants, cracking watermelon rinds with their biceps, or performing other outlandish feats of strength. But Walter was different. He possessed the raw muscle, sure, but as he liked to say, he had the soul of a poet. He couldn't bear to watch anyone suffer, least of all the props that Randy set out for him to destroy in the name of spectacle. In a corner of the tent, an actual poet named Winnie scribbled down verses on a dog-eared notepad. She had come to the carnival in search of inspiration and had found herself strangely riveted by Walter's conundrum. Winnie was a self-proclaimed observer of life's ironies, and in Walter she saw the personification of the gentle giant, broad as a barn door, but delicate as fine china in how he handled the world. Winnie thought his predicament would make a delightful poem, though she was still wrangling with the right words to capture his spirit. As the afternoon sun began to set, the show's audience filed into the bleachers outside the tent. Randy busied himself with dramatic announcements between blasts of a kazoo. "Ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages, step right up to witness the incredible feats of the great Walter, a man with the strength of 10 lions and the speed of an Olympic champion. He can lift anvils, bend steel, and knock down stone walls." The crowd mumbled excitedly, nudging one another and craning their necks for a glimpse of this mighty figure. Walter, who had been trying to psych himself up by flexing behind the curtained entrance, approached the stage. The partition fluttered aside, and he walked out to a half-hearted fanfare from Rufus, the carnival's trumpet player, whose uncertain notes conveyed that he wasn't entirely sure Walter was up to the job. Walter cleared his throat. His hand dwarfed the microphone, and the squeal of feedback made him nearly joggle it precariously. He gave a shaky wave to the seats. "Good evening, folks," he said softly, albeit with a voice that echoed from deep within his vast chest. Some of the children in the front row gawked, wide-eyed at his sheer size, while a few older folks snickered, anticipating an over-the-top performance of smashing boards. On Randy's cue, an assistant dragged out the first demonstration, a wide wooden plank affixed to 2 cinder blocks so Walter could stomp through it or smash it with his fist. Walter bent down, testing the board with a slow, careful push. His heart hammering, he mumbled an internal apology to the inanimate object. Then, putting on his mightiest face, he reared back and delivered a gentle tap. It made a dull clunk. The board didn't budge. A few audience members tittered, uncertain at first whether they were witnessing an act or a fail. Randy's face contorted, his eyes nearly popping out as if to say, "Now is not the time to be mild." Walter tried again. This time he lifted his foot and set it against the plank. He pressed down, but once again with too much caution. The wood bowed, complained with a whine, but held firm. A meandering giggle started rolling through the crowd. Determined to fulfill the show's promise, Walter inhaled deeply, He tried pounding the board with the side of his fist, but the blow was still gentler than a toddler's bounce on a plush cushion. A few more members of the audience laughed. Randy, bristling with frustration, rummaged behind the stage until he seized an old sledgehammer. He motioned to Walter as if to say, "For heaven's sake, use this!" Walter took it, feeling its reassuring heft, but his hands trembled. He understood he was expected to destroy the board now, powerfully. Leaving the audience in awe, summoning every ounce of determination, Walter eyed the plank. Fighting the swirl of moral conflict inside him, he raised the sledgehammer high. The crowd collectively tensed, waiting for the crunch of wood. Walter envisioned the heartbreak he'd feel if he snapped the plank into splinters. Despite some comedic sense that this was supposed to be his bread and butter, he couldn't bear breaking it violently. He squeezed his eyes shut and brought the hammer down. To everyone's amazement, the hammer connected with the board in sudden slow motion. Instead of a sharp crack, there was a dull thud, followed by a mild bounce and a comedic boing as the hammer slipped from Walter's palm, clattering harmlessly to the side. Several people in the front row burst into laughter, the rest soon following suit. Walter stood there with a stunned expression, arms pinned to his sides, as if they had just realized they couldn't perform the deed. Randy's showman grin wavered. He tried to salvage the situation by roaring, "And that, ladies and gentlemen, is just a little taste of the great Walter's unstoppable might. We'll take a short break before returning with more astonishing feats." He tapped Walter's shoulder instructively, and Walter begrudgingly followed him off stage. Once they were out of earshot, Randy whirled on Walter. "You have to smash something, break something, do something. Nobody's gonna pay for a show where the strongman gently pats the prop." He mopped sweat from his brow, despair creeping into his eyes. "Have you tried therapy? Asked a hypnotist to help you get in touch with your destructive side?" Walter sized up the manager, his personal frustration mounting. "I'm sorry, Mr. Peak, I can't help it. I see these boards, these rods, these things that I'm supposed to obliterate, and I get so anxious. I hear them screaming in my mind, 'Don't break me, don't break me.' It's like I'm harming a part of the world, you know? And I don't like to hurt anything." Randy plopped onto a nearby crate, burying his face in his hands. "Oh, this is just wonderful," he muttered. "You've got the muscle of a man who can lift a bull with one hand, but the heart of someone who can't swat a fly." Walter lowered his head. Suddenly sad, his moral qualms were making life so difficult for everyone else. Over the next few days, Randy tried every approach he could dream up to coax Walter into letting loose with his strength. For instance, they set up practice sessions in private, just Walter, a few boards, and Rangoon, a retired clown who tried to add comedic pep talks like, "Pretend those boards are giant zucchinis, Walter! Chop, chop, chop!" But despite repeated attempts, all they ever accomplished was creating a big comedic fiasco. Try as he might, Walter simply could not bring himself to inflict decisive damage on anything. Meanwhile, Winnie the poet lingered around, scribbling more lines whenever she thought no one was looking. She was convinced Walter was the perfect metaphor for the world's capacity for kindness. Something about his gentle, clumsy refusal to use his power violently made her want to cheer him on, and also poke gentle fun at just how many tries it took for him to fail at breaking a single plank. Each evening, Walter would wander the carnival grounds, watching the funnel cake vendors and the Ferris wheel operator and the corners where children swarmed around face paint booths. He delighted in small acts of caring, picking up a lost child to reunite them with their parents, or gently rescuing a ladybug from an overflowed soda cup. Only then did he feel at peace, unencumbered by his role as the great Walter. In truth, he'd have loved to be caretaker for the carnival's menagerie, but that job had gone to a surly man named Barkley, who ironically adored smashing crates as a hobby. On a particularly warm afternoon, the carnival's biggest sponsor came to watch Walter's performance. The sponsor, a portly man with a tall hat, had a deep laugh, and apparently enough cash to back the entire traveling operation for months if he was impressed. Randy hurried around, insisting everything looked perfect. He'd even assigned an extra safety measure in case Walter decided to back out again, a small team near the stage with pre-sawed boards that were practically broken already, ensuring that even the lightest brush could crumble them convincingly. Walter eyed these suspiciously cut boards as they were set up. While he didn't particularly want to break them, he thought maybe the fact that they were nearly done for would lessen his moral conflict. After all, maybe it was more merciful to them to finish the job if they were already half broken. Thus, with a measure of reluctant resolve, he took his place on the stage as the sponsor settled in the front row. The opening fanfare kicked in. Randy boomed theatrically. "Ladies and gentlemen, gather round to witness the unstoppable might of the great Walter." The crowd whooped, though a few folks rolled their eyes as if to say, "We know how this goes." Walter stepped up, sweaty palms clasped together, and faced his first victim of the evening. A precariously sawed board perched between two cinder blocks. He exhaled, pushing aside the vision of boards screaming in anguish. Leaning forward, he pressed a meaty palm gently on its center. He felt the wood quiver, sensed its fragility, and to his surprise, his dreading heart found a semblance of calm. "It's already broken," he murmured inwardly. "I'm just finishing it." With that rationalization, he employed a bit more force. Sure enough, the thing snapped with barely a sound. The audience gasped, then burst into raucous applause. The sponsor's eyebrows shot up in genuine delight. Walter felt a peculiar mix of relief and remorse, mostly relief that he'd finally succeeded in not whiffing the feat. He turned to Randy, who looked like he'd seen the gates of paradise open. Encouraged by the applause, Walter strode over to a set of iron rods that were also tampered with. Heated beforehand to soften them, he gulped nervously, took one rod in his hands, and gingerly bent it, ignoring its faint plaintive squeak. The crowd erupted a second time. People cheered, kiddos gasped, and the sponsor's hearty laughter rumbled through the tent. A sense of acceptance washed over Walter. Maybe this wasn't so bad. Before he could fully settle into this questionable comfort, Randy hollered, "And now for the grand finale." Assistants hurriedly wheeled out an old, battered anvil. Walter's eyes went wide as they placed it next to a sledgehammer. Even though illusions and rigged props were a carnival staple, there was no feasible way to rig an anvil so it would break. This was either a major oversight or a last-ditch attempt at drama. Randy, riding the wave of excitement, declared, "We present the great Walter, who will split this anvil in two using nothing but his bare hands and unstoppable might." The air thickened with tension. Murmurs rolled through the crowd. Walter's face turned pale. He had seen old blacksmiths at some of the carnival stops. He knew just how solid an anvil really was. Nonetheless, he ambled forward, pressing both volcano-like arms around the hunk of metal, determined at least to give the audience a show. He squeezed. The metal didn't budge. The friction heated his arms, and sweat trickled in rivulets down his forehead. The sponsor let out a giddy whoop. But of course, nothing cracked, and Walter's heart weighed like a lead balloon. In the hush that followed, Walter heard a squeak. He paused his fruitless attempts, glancing around to see the cause. It was no squeaking plank or bending rod. This was a real sign of trouble. Something whirred from above. The main rope securing the circus tent's overhead rigging had snapped with the day's humidity. Now a large wooden sign decorated with the carnival's name wobbled precariously. He heard a collective gasp ripple through the audience. The sign lurched, ready to plummet straight into the stands. Without another thought for his strongman persona, Walter sprinted forward with surprising agility. People in the first few rows scattered, but a mother and her small child had nowhere to run in time. Walter dove, arms outstretched, and caught the plummeting sign. He braced his feet, and the ground beneath him nearly buckled, yet he absorbed the weight, preventing the massive sign from crushing the mother and child. The impact jarred him to the bone, but Walter remained upright, heart pounding. For one brief moment, no one breathed. As spectators realized what had happened, cheers erupted as though 1,000 fireworks had gone off simultaneously. People rushed to make sure those nearly squashed were okay. The sponsor hopped around, clapping in pure exhilaration. Randy, wide-eyed, nearly tripped over his own feet to get to Walter. And in that moment, The towering strongman realized his muscles had finally served a purpose he could be proud of, protecting people rather than breaking things. The child in the mother's arms burst into tears, but they weren't tears of pain, just shock. Meanwhile, Walter gingerly lowered the sign to the ground, wincing as he felt the tension in his arms. He turned to the crowd. Their expressions were lit with awe, genuine and unfiltered. He heard someone call out, "You saved their lives, big guy." Another chipped in, "That's real strength." Cheers soared, and an exhilarated father in the third row started a chant, "Walter! Walter!" In no time, a wave of chanting filled the tent. Embarrassed, Walter gave a little bow, feeling heat flush his cheeks. No thrashing of boards or snapping of rods could match this moment. Because here, his compassion was on full display, shining brighter than any gimmick. Brief flashes of guilt nagged him, though. He remembered how he'd tried to break boards earlier, how he'd hated it. But then he realized those petty illusions were overshadowed now. People had seen that his true strength was not in destructive feats but in saving people's lives. Randy hurried over, breathing heavily. "Walter, he shook his head in disbelief. "That was absolutely sensational. Better than 100 broken boards. The crowd's losing their minds out there for you." Randy's grin was ear to ear, the corners of his mustache almost curling off his face. "You just might be the biggest attraction we've got, you big softy." Walter exhaled in relief that Randy was taking it so well. "I didn't do it for a show, Mr. Peak. I did it because it was the right thing to do." "And that's why it's a smash hit, ironically," Randy replied, patting him on the shoulder with an air of restored theatrics. "From now on, forget forcing yourself to shred boards. We'll put you in situations where your strength helps people." He paused, seeming genuinely touched, reminding them that big arms don't need to need to break things. For the next few days, the carnival buzzed with talk of Walter's heroic catch. Word spread through the small town and beyond like wildfire. "Did you hear about the huge guy who saved a lady and her kid from a falling sign? Must be that gentle giant from the carnival." Locals came in droves, bringing their families to see the strongman, though all expected a demonstration very different from standard muscle brutality. They wanted to behold a caring, protective figure who used his considerable power only for good. And that was exactly what Randy and Walter planned to deliver. The star's new routine became something akin to a comedic safety demonstration, albeit more dramatic. In one segment, an accidental toppling of multiple crates was staged. Walter, with lightning reflexes, would rush in to catch them before a poor volunteer, really an assistant, was crushed. The crowd would gasp, then applaud thunderously. Next up, there was a bit where a massive older woman would pretend to faint or lose her balance at the top of a tall platform, and Walter would softly scoop her up in one arm, carrying her down gently. She would phony swoon over his kindness, making the audience laugh at her dramatic batting eyelashes. Although it was all orchestrated for show, it felt like a better fit for Walter's tender heart. Kids would swarm after, wanting to get near the kind strongman, and Walter would kindly ruffle their hair, making them squeal with delight. One afternoon, just as the carnival was winding down for the day, Winnie found Walter standing by the ring toss booth. He was listening peacefully to a mechanical organ's tune while nibbling on cotton candy. "You really are an interesting character," she remarked, brandishing her notebook. "I've made so many notes about you, you'd think I was writing a novel instead of a poem." Walter turned, offering a friendly smile. "You're welcome to write all you want. I don't think I deserve a poem, though." "Are you kidding?" Winnie laughed, brushing hair from her face. "You're a perfect paradox, big enough to knock over a building, yet you empathize with fragile things. That's what the world needs more of." She flipped through her notes. "Everyone wants to see strength as something unstoppable and maybe even destructive, but your strength is protective. It's a breath of fresh air." Walter considered this. "I spent so much time beating myself up because I couldn't break boards. I guess I never realized people might like me the way I am." Winnie's eyes sparkled. "I suspect quite a few people do. Sometimes our greatest strength is in defending rather than attacking." She extended her notebook to show him a short, whimsical poem scrawled there. Walter read lines about a giant who cups baby birds in his hands, who sees no glory in smashing what's smaller, who becomes a shelter in a storm. The poem's gentle rhythm made his heart swell. "That's beautiful," he whispered, handing it back. "If you like it," Winnie said shyly, "you could maybe read it on stage sometime, or I could put a copy in your dressing room." Walter smiled, feeling unaccustomed warmth spread from within. "I'd be honored," he said, "though I'm not sure if Randy wants me reciting poetry. He might prefer me making a big carnival spectacle." "Well, you can do both," she teased, patting his bicep. "People won't walk away bored when the carnival's strongman can also speak with a poet's soul." A few paces away, the sponsor from earlier reappeared, tipping his tall hat in greeting. "Young man, your heroic antics have become this carnival's selling point," he announced. "I heard next you'll be demonstrating your might by lifting a miniature horse while reciting something about daisies. Is that true?" Walter blinked, reddening. "That might be an exaggeration, sir," the sponsor chortled. "Show me anything half as thrilling as saving a mother and child, and I'll keep you all funded until the cows come home." He fished out a checkbook, scribbled some zeros on a piece of paper, and handed it to Walter. "Use it for improvements, or to buy more gentle giant paraphernalia, or perhaps a donkey for you to carry around, if you wish." Walter, wide-eyed, glanced at the sponsor's scribbled figure, struggling to speak. The sponsor gave him a conspiratorial wink. "You earned it, big guy. You represent something brand new. Muscle used as kindness incarnate." As the sponsor waddled off, Randy appeared, nearly stumbling in excitement. "Did he just... Is that what I think it is?" Walter nodded, and Randy whooped at the top of his lungs, drawing the attention of half the fairgrounds. Without warning, Randy threw his arms around Walter in a grateful hug. "I never in my wildest dreams expected this. Bless your enormous heart, Walter." The carnival lingered in that small town for another few weeks, capitalizing on Walter's newfound fame. Randy began planning a new stage reinforce, of course, and introduced Walter's Hour of Amazing Rescue. Stunts included comedic illusions of rolling barrels heading for an unsuspecting clown, a crumbling tower of crates, or a giant helium balloon drifting off with an adult passenger. In each scenario, Walter would come to the rescue, employing his unstoppable brawn in the kindest possible way. Audiences adored it. Word spread, and soon they were drawing in sold-out crowds. On the final night in town, the carnival put on a grand performance under a sky blazing with stars. Each act was greeted with anticipation, culminating in Walter's big moment at the end. The lights dimmed and a hush fell. Winnie stepped out first, brandishing a small microphone. The carnival staff was uncertain about letting her read poetry, but Randy had been convinced by the sponsor that mixing artistry with spectacle could heighten the drama. Winnie offered a soft introduction. "Ladies and gentlemen, we often think being strong means destruction, but tonight we celebrate a different kind of strength, the kind that catches you when you fall. I'd like to share a short poem, and then the great Walter will show you just what I mean." With that, Winnie began to recite her piece, the final version of the poem Walter had read in her notebook. Its images painted a gentle giant who refused to break the world, caring for it with arms wide enough to protect. The hush of the mesmerized crowd was absolute. When she finished, Walter strode forward. He wore no brand new costume, just his usual outfit, a plain shirt that could barely contain his shoulders, and athletic pants that gave him space to maneuver. In the spotlight, his face was determined but calm. Standing center stage, he glanced around at the expectant expressions. Then, as if on cue, a teetering scaffold behind him began its orchestrated tumble, several precariously stacked crates, and a few of the carnival's comedic sets balanced on top. The audience gasped. Stage lights swung onto the fiasco, revealing a hapless clown perched near the top who pretended to wobble dangerously. Walter sprang into action. With an agile leap, he scaled part of the scaffold and braced it with his broad shoulders. Boxes toppled and threatened to tumble, but he shifted his arms, making delicate adjustments to guide the momentum. He effectively cradled the clown in his arms as the structure finally collapsed with a theatrically timed crash. The entire fiasco transpired with stylized chaos, the clown flailing, the crowd shrieking, and Walter's expression unflappable as he gently eased everyone to safety. As the dust settled, applause thundered so loudly that Walter could feel it vibrating in his chest. He lowered the clown and doffed an imaginary cap. When Walter turned back, he saw tears in some spectators' eyes, not of sadness, but of relief, gratitude, and even pride. Among them was the sponsor, once again beaming. Randy hopped up onto the stage, stepping over a few scattered crates. He grasped Walter's hand, lifting it high in an unmistakable gesture of victory. The entire tent exploded with cheers, and, in that triumphant moment, Walter recognized something profound. He was still a strongman, but his act was more than that. It was an embodiment of caring, a genuinely new brand of carnival attraction. The crowd began chanting, "Walter! Walter!" once more. Winnie watched from the sidelines, hugging her notepad to her chest, tears shining in her eyes. And for the first time since Walter had started touring with the carnival, he felt unburdened, free from the guilt he once harbored about not fulfilling the typical expectations of a strongman, smashing things to impress a crowd. Now, the audience was cheering for him just as he was a gentle giant who used his strength to safeguard instead of destroy. In the days that followed, they packed up the carnival to move on to the next town, but the axe had changed for good. Randy rebranded it all. Come one, come all to witness the unstoppable heart of the great Walter the Gentle Giant of Miracles. Billboards went up featuring images of Walter saving someone from falling debris or catching a tumbling tower. The carnival staff teased him affectionately, calling him the sweetest Colossus. Meanwhile, Winnie continued to pen odes in his honor, many of which she planned to publish in a chapbook titled He Who Protects. And though Walter teased her that the name sounded overly heroic, she insisted it suited him perfectly. On the road, Walter sometimes caught glimpses of smaller tournaments and traveling performers, some strongmen who still did the typical breaking and bending stuff. And that was fine, he realized. There was room in the world for all kinds of strength. But for him, protecting felt more natural. He had found his calling, and nothing, not fear, not reluctance, not even the money-hungry crowds, could sway him from it. Oddly enough, it turned out that people appreciated a strongman who didn't want to break a single thing. Late one evening, as Walter helped load a final batch of equipment onto the carnival's vehicles, Randy sidled up and nudged him playfully. "You know, we're not going to have to purchase many new boards or rods now," he remarked wryly. "Think of all the money we're saving," Walter laughed. "Glad I could help with overhead costs." "Speaking of overhead, maybe next time we do a stunt involving a giant boulder swinging from a rope, you can step in to keep it from smashing into the crowd," Randy quipped. "I'm sure the sponsor will love that." They shared a grin. Then Randy gave him a friendly farewell pat, moving on to direct the bulldozers as they cleared the path. Walter was left to gaze at the last rays of a setting sun. The fiery streaks of orange and pink across the sky seemed to reflect his own sense of hope and renewal. In the near distance, Winnie waved at him, notebook in hand, and beckoned him over. He wouldn't mind hearing her newest poem. Picking up his massive duffel with ease, Walter took one last sweeping glance at the empty carnival grounds in the twilight. He could still picture the rapt faces of children cheering and adults applauding, could still hear the chant of his name. Let them remember him as the gentle giant who all but refused to snap a board in half, but would lift a falling sign to save a family, cradle an entire scaffold to protect a clown, and quietly, tenderly hold a baby bird in his equally huge hand if it ever tumbled from the nest. Yeah, that was a brand of strength the carnival had never seen before, and somehow it felt right at home in Walter's enormous and compassionate arms.